Welcome back, Retronauts, and what are we working on today? Well, we're working on the Dell Dimension E520, which is a Windows XP era machine from the late part of Windows XP, just before Vista came out. So this machine was found on the side of a road in my housing estate. I live on a suburban housing estate outside London, and there's a bit of a thing in the area about getting things recycled internally, if that makes sense. In other words, put something outside and let somebody take it and use it if they still have use of it. And if it hasn't disappeared after a few days, then you know it's junk, and you can take it to the landfill and hopefully have it e-waste recycled there instead. Now, the problem was, at the end of the last video, we found out that when we plugged this in and powered it up, we didn't get any video. And apparently it does have integrated graphics. It would have been probably Intel integrated graphics, as far as I can tell, built into the chipset. I didn't get any video, nothing at all, which is a bit worrying. I did hear a little bit of a click out of the hard drive, and the DVD drive did actually twitch. The light came on and it went through the actions, but that might be just, you know, the power being applied to the DVD ROM and it just working, I suppose. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take it out and we're going to try and test it with a different power supply. I received this yesterday. It's a Be Quiet power supply from 2017. It's a bit of an octopus. It's got all these cables here, but these are all necessary. And the main thing that I was after was this. This is a 6-pin, it says on here VGA, which is a bit weird, but basically graphics card power connector. And that became a thing, I think, about 1 year before the graphics card that I'm going to put in this machine went onto the market. So basically the PCI Express port couldn't supply enough power to power the graphics card. So you then had to start using extra power direct from the power supply. And obviously this today is perfectly standard. This is normal. Right now we're having issues with NVIDIA cards actually melting because they're requiring so much power from the power supply. That's how far things have gone in that direction. But this has got all the standard connectors on it, plus more. You know, I think that's a 20-pin connector, which is, I think, what we need for this machine. And it has the 4-pin connector for the CPU. So if this works, and it was sold as working, it's relatively new, I suppose, 2017, then, well, hopefully we'll be able to get the graphics card working if the logic board is in a decent state. One of my viewers, actually one of my channel members, pointed out that he thought that one of the caps on the logic board is bulging. We're going to have a look at that today. I've already started to take out the screws. Must admit, very stiff in this machine, and there are 1 or 2 of them which are actually in quite hard to access locations. So I had to get out the chubby screwdriver, one of these, because it gives you more torque, you know, just using your hands. I normally use a much thinner one, but I just literally couldn't turn the screws. So I've deployed chubby here and it's done the job. So let's get this machine on its side. We'll get the logic board out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a quick inspection and see what I can see if I can see any cracks or any damage. And then what we're going to do is we're going to try and plug in the graphics card. And on here, we'll just set up a little bench and we'll see if we can actually get some life out of it when we power it up with the graphics card plugged in. So fingers crossed that we can get some life out of this today. Anyway, let's crack on. Okay, let's see if we can extricate this from the case. I've got the main power supply out, the 4-pin connector for the CPU, the 2 starters. I can't get this out. It's got like a little handle on it. Maybe I should try pulling one more time. I guess the handle suggests that it requires quite a lot of force. Can't see any clips on it. And this, I think, is the front panel thing here, which has the audio and the USB. So let's try one more time. God, that's in tight. That just seems crazy. Okay, I'm not going to force it. Let me have a think about this. Why would this not move? Possibly these. Okay, so I'm just going to take out the... Yeah, it looks like the actual bracket here for the CPU cooler is potentially screwed into the logic board as well. That would be very solid, so that's not going to move. Really not sure if I'm going to be able to leave this in place if the new cooler that I've got, the Cooler Master, is going to work with this, because I'm assuming they both fit into the same screw holes, and I'm assuming that the cooler system that Dell had was proprietary. They tended to make everything pretty much proprietary. Okay, those are slightly different, so I need to keep track of those. There we are. Okay, do we have any give now? Oh yeah, that's a lot better. Okay, what's the best way for me to take this out? I'm holding it by the USB ports. Actually, this is going to have to come out anyway, right? So let's take these out. Do I need to take that out? Actually, no, I don't. Let's just leave that. Okay, now this cable is actually held in by this power supply thing here. So what I want to get a look at is this. Why is this so incredibly difficult to remove? Oh man, that was crazy. Okay, let's put this out of the way for a second. Take this, put it out of the way. Okay, there we are. There's the logic board. So here we are, it's the board, and I would say points go to the channel member already, because look at this. That definitely looks like it's doming there, it's bulging. Not sure what that does, to be honest. It's a pretty big cap by today's standards. I mean, this is obviously 20 years ago, but still it's relatively modern. And over here as well, these two chaps, they seem to be the same brand, these brown ones. And they're also slightly bulging as well. Not bulging quite as much, but they're definitely bulging. The other ones, these black ones, they all look pretty decent. I'm not seeing any signs of any cracking. And I've had a look at this as well, side on. What I can see is that the can itself is sort of standing up off the board. So it looks like the bottom of the can, there's what it is on the legs of these. There's like a little rubber bung that goes in the bottom, and then the two leads come out through the bottom of that rubber bung. Looks like that rubber bung is being pushed downwards, and that's effectively making it kind of stand up like this. So it looks like this is actually bulging at both ends, and I'm getting the feeling that we've got the same thing going on over here. So I think these definitely need to be replaced. Now the problem is, if you buy this stuff off Moser or something like that, it costs a lot of money for packaging, post and packaging, like £8 generally. These probably cost something like 20 pence, something like that. So I'm going to have to try and find if anybody is selling maybe these on eBay, decent brand with cheaper post and packaging, ideally free. Even if I pay more for the caps, I'll save money on the post and packaging, because those companies, yeah, they charge way too much really. So that's issue number one. Do I think these will stop the machine working? It's difficult to tell without actually taking them out, but I would imagine not. There's a decent chance that they hold enough charge for the machine to keep on working. But you never know. I've just recapped my CD32, and that, when it wasn't recapped, didn't work because there wasn't enough power getting into the caps, basically. So yeah, there is the potential for these to stop the machine working. Another issue that I found is I've taken out the CR2032 battery, which is used here for the BIOS. And if I put my meter on here, we do a quick measure of it, you'll see basically getting 0.1 millivolt. Yeah, it's basically completely flat. There we are, 0.009. And if I show you a fresh one, our old enemy, the Varta, in this case, our friend, it'll show up as a 3.2 volts, which is exactly what it should be. So let's pop that in there, because we need this to keep the BIOS alive. There we go, it's in position. I think what we need to do next is get this set up so we can actually plug in the graphics card. What I mean by that is we'll need a screen so we can see obviously the output of the graphics card. I'll need to plug in the power here, the power here. What else will I need? I don't necessarily need the hard drives, I think, to test the video. We've got USB here, so if we do need keyboard, we've got that, I think. We've got a mouse and keyboard connection here. I think that's about it, really. Not sure what this is. I'll have to check the manual for this. And these guys, so what I've done is, if I flip it over for you, you won't be able to see this. It's probably a little bit too fine a detail. But basically, I've checked these traces here on the board, and I'm not seeing anything here that's been reworked. I think this is the original soldering from the factory, so you can probably see the caps there. Are these surface mounted? No, they're not. They're definitely through hole. Okay, so yeah, these are the pins coming through the board. So I'm not seeing evidence there of these being reworked. So in other words, these must be, for some reason, test marks from the factory. Not sure what they were doing, if they were measuring underneath or something. Not really sure what you could do once they're in circuit. They're quite hard to measure. So yeah, I'm not sure what that's all about. Definitely, we do need to get these replaced. I'm assuming they're all the same. They're 6.3 volt, 3,300 microfarad, I think it is. And I'm assuming that one's the same. I'm assuming these two are the same and this one is the same. So I'll have to get 3 or 4 of those. And then definitely we need to replace those before we finish off with this machine. Right, I've got it set up. It's sitting pretty comfortably actually on top of an ice cream tub. And the reason for that is I've had to raise it because there are some tabs here for the mounting brackets at the back of the PC. I'm a little bit worried because the card does go right up against the USB ports here, because when this machine was designed, I suppose the idea of double width cards wasn't really a thing. But this has a big cooling fan on it, so it is double width. So I am a little bit worried about that. I may have to make an adjustment to the case over there because there is a metal mesh that goes around the back ports, I guess, to block UF interference. So yeah, we'll have to see how that goes. I think I'm a bit stressed, so I'll have a bit of chocolate. Got a bit of Galaxy here. This is not a sponsorship, I just like Galaxy. It's not as good as it used to be, mind you. Right then, so let's turn it on, fingers crossed. Okay, this fan is rotated. The fan on the GPU actually rotated slightly, then stopped. This is still spinning. No graphics. The fan here started spinning. Aha! Hey! Look at that, we've got something. Okay, it's not going to work well. Let's try. Well, I haven't got a hard drive, have I? Okay, so let's turn it off. The reason why I'm turning it off really quite quickly is because the CPU here doesn't have a proper cooler on it. This is a 1.8 gigahertz CPU. If you think about my video with my ICL machine, that was a 90 megahertz CPU, and that already needed a cooler, a passive cooler, you know, something like copper or something like that. So when we get to this stage, which is 2006, you really need an active cooler with a fan to dissipate the heat as quickly as possible. So if I put my hand on the CPU, it's mildly warm. So I think what we'll do is we'll let it cool down. We'll get the hard drive from there. We'll see if it actually boots up, because I've put the battery back in for the BIOS. It may just boot anyway. We might have to fiddle around in the BIOS, but anyway, let's see. So let me just get the hard drive out of here. There we go. Okay, let's pop this over here. And we'll need power for it as well. Okay, just checking the orientation of the power jack on this. There we are. Very dusty, the hard drive, actually. Okay, I'm going to stay over this side this time. So let's see. The fan spinning. Okay, it's saying there's a couple of sensors missing, which is correct. They're not plugged in. They're over there with the case. Let's press F1. I can hear it moving. Look at that. It actually works. Hey! Okay, well, I'm not going to let it boot up because the CPU is going to get too hot, I think, doing all the work. So let's just turn that off. Great. So there's a possibility we can put together this build exactly the way I want it to. I am very much worried about this bracket here because it is literally right up against the USB ports there. But the power supply works, the graphics card works, the logic board works. There are those three caps which we definitely have to recap. So I'm going to order replacement caps for those, and I can't really put this back in the case with those not recapped. And what I'll do is, as well, I think, is I'll strip this all down again and I'll check the caps again, and I'll make sure that all the caps which I'm going to leave on are okay. Because right now, if I'm going to order the caps, I may as well just get the order in and wait a few days for those to turn up. Fantastic, we have a working PC. I've got to now think about putting on the heatsink as well for the CPU. But before we do that, let's have a quick word from our sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay, where you can make your tech dreams a reality. Starting on September the 1st and running for the entire month of September, PCBWay has an offer on Purple Solder Mask. Yes, if you were Prince, you could have your Purple Solder Mask for absolutely free. So why not hop online right now to get those vibrant PCBs on their way to you? And if that wasn't enough, during September, PCBWay are also offering a special discount on 3D printing with TPU. Prints over 20 grams will enjoy increasing discounts as the part gets heavier, with a maximum saving of up to 80%. So why not head over to PCBWay right now? Because whether it's PCB prototyping, PCB assembly, 3D printing, or even CNC machining, PCBWay is the way. Starting with an instant quote for your PCB projects, PCBWay will leap into action, building your PCB, assembling it for you if you wish, and once it's passed their quality tests, it'll be winging its way to you in a flash. PCBWay, PCB prototyping the easy way. So quite a lot has transpired since the last chapter. You can see here on the table the sort of detritus of what I've been doing, and there is some good out of it, but mostly bad. And I think what this chapter is going to prove is that these videos are not like sort of straight ahead journeys. It's not like, especially with a machine like this just found on the side of a road, that I have a plan, that I'm an expert in this, that I'm just going to pick this up and put it all together, and all of a sudden, you know, wham bam, thank you ma'am, you've got an amazing working PC. It's not always a straight ahead journey. And yeah, this definitely proves it. So what am I waffling on about? Well, number one, I did manage to get the fan working from the cooler. So let me show you that. There's the guy. Now, if I turn on the PC, right now I've got another heatsink on the actual CPU. There we are. There's the fan spinning. So as I said, I managed to use some dew point connectors to create a bit of a sort of Franken connection between there and there. I'm using ground and 12 volts to give me the power for the fan. And there's also a signal as well that gives you, I think it's the tachyometer, to tell how fast it's spinning. I don't currently have that connected, so I'm assuming it's going to run at full speed. I must say, it's actually very quiet. I don't have it in position. I do have some thermal paste on the bottom of it, so I've got to be careful I don't let that touch anything. Let's turn this off. So that's the good news. What that means is, in the future, when I actually get to test this out properly again, I can take this off, because this obviously doesn't have the thermal dissipation that we need for a CPU of this speed. And I can put this on just using the suction of the actual thermal paste. But yeah, for now, that's a big advantage. We've got that working. Everything's fantastic. But this is where the wheels came off the cart. I put this card back on when I had all this set up, with this set on here. And you know what I discovered? I found that when this was put in position, it intersects with this area here. So I'm not putting this the right way around. Let me put this the right way around and actually put it like that. So this is basically with it in position. I don't know if that's clear from the camera position there, but let me try and turn it a bit. It encroaches massively on the CPU area here, this card. And if I turn it the other way as well, maybe you can see that a bit better. Basically, it runs from the front, or the back, I should say, of the case all the way to the front. And why is that a big issue? Well, because it basically intersects with the CPU. And that gets worse when you look at the cooler itself. So let me show you the situation with the cooler. So this is the bracket that's intended to be used on the cooler. So I assumed that because this is an LGA 755 socket, which was a very long-standing socket from Intel, that this cooler that I bought, a standard cooler for that socket, would work on it. This is the bracket that you're required to put on. And basically there are some hooks on the cooler that hook onto here, and Bob's your uncle, you've got a cooler attached to your CPU. The problem is, if I put this in position here, you can see that's just not going to fit. And the reason for that is that the holes that this meant to go through is here and here. Well, I say they're meant to go through, they're not. And then at the back of the case, you've got these other holes here. So they don't fit in any dimension. This is basically a rectangular area, and this is a square, as you can see. It's a square bracket, basically. Well, I know this is round, but it's square. Doesn't fit at all. So this is why you're seeing me using the cooler without it actually being attached to the CPU. I'm just using the surface tension of the thermal paste to hold it in position, because this will not fit on here at all. It's never going to happen. So that's issue number one. Issue number two. Even if it did, it would intersect with this card, because this card runs all the way from the back of the case to the front of the case. Now, that situation's bad enough, but if I get the actual official cooler, which we are going to have to use, we must use this. If I put this in position, you can see what a behemoth it is. It's actually gone off camera. Let me position that to get that a bit closer for you so you can see it. There we go. It looks like some kind of aircraft hangar, doesn't it, from the 1920s. It's absolutely massive. And what's missing is the aluminium block that used to be here that would go down onto the CPU. And the way this is meant to work is this bracket is meant to be screwed into the board, and this is then meant to pivot like this, and it basically pivots down and sits onto your CPU with your thermal paste. So in that regard, it's pretty good. You can actually get the heatsink off relatively easily. All you have to do is undo these screws here, and you can then pivot this off because there's some hooks here that allow you to do that. But the situation with the graphics card becomes even more bizarre when I put that in position, because, yeah, this has a cooler which is massive and it wants to go there. It's just never going to happen. So this card cannot be used with this PC. It's going to have to be a bit of a plan B. And in fact, I would say right now it's what plan C. We can't use the cooler, we can't use the card. So luckily, I was in discussion with a few guys on Vogons, and I was asking people on there for advice on what power supply I should get, whether this would work in this machine, etc., etc. And along the way, I mentioned that I'm planning to use this card, that this card has a certain power requirement. I think this is 150 watts. One of the guys on Vogon said this card was always problematic, has a tendency to break because the cooling solution isn't necessarily good enough. So, you know, it might be on borrowed time. The other problem with it is it does require, as you can see, extra power. This is why I bought this power supply, because this actually has the VGA connectors. And as we saw in the last segment, we put it in and it works, which is great. But as I said, it's never going to work, never going to fit in here, not when we've got the cooler in place. So the plan B is we're going to go for a new graphics card. It's a GTX 750. It's actually a newer card than this. Even though this is an 8000 card, it comes from a different generation. I think this is about 2008, and I think the GTX 750 comes from 2014. So quite a lot newer than this card. And the GTX 750 is I've actually gone for the TI version. I've gone for the 750 Ti. The reason why it makes sense is because you can get XP drivers for it. It does work in a machine of this generation. The Vogon guys have tested this out and they found that to be true. And the only reason why I went for the TI card was because it's basically the same price as the GTX card. It uses, I think, 5 more watts of power. So therefore it should work in this machine. It might give me a little bit more headroom. It does have 2 gigabytes of RAM rather than 1 gigabyte on the GTX model. So I thought, same price, probably the same bottleneck, to be honest, as the GTX, so why not go for that? So I'm waiting for that to turn up. I've also gone online and ordered one of these. Now, I must admit, it's a bit of a risk because I couldn't find exactly the right model of this. This bracket will be going back in place. As we saw when we took the machine apart, this basically just screws back onto the board. So it's going to be a little bit of a pain to do when the machine's disassembled because we don't have any way of holding this in position. So to be honest, I'm probably going to keep my little fan here for testing this machine out, because what I need to do is I need to have this running on the bench here, because I've got this hard disk and I'm going to install OS on this and then blank the hard disk, which has got somebody's private data on it over there. So we need this, but once this is all set up and working, we've got XP going and the machine is all functional, then I can put it back into the case. I can put on the official cooler, the Behemoth, and then we can get this hopefully back in working action. The one I have ordered is for I think it's an E520, obviously not this model, but what I'm betting on is that Dell did not design an individual shroud just for one machine, that they designed it for an era, probably for the LGA 5755 socket, and therefore, you know, it's going to work basically. Fingers crossed. I think it's being delivered today. It's now Sunday, to give you an idea of the timeline. So a few days have gone past now. So there we are. We're stuck for now, but you know, possibly we are a little bit clearer in what we need to do. So it's a few days later, the graphics card has turned up. There it is. It's a Zotac, as I said earlier, it's a 750 Ti. Slight generational shift in the outputs on it. Actually, if you have a look there, we've got 2 DVI, and now we've actually got a mini HDMI port. So obviously we've got the option of using it with a monitor like this, which is DVI based, but we can also use it with a HDMI based monitor as well now, which is cool. The old one, this one, the 8800 GT, actually has an SVHS there. I was interested in trying that out and seeing how good the quality was on that, but anyway. Now the caps have also turned up, so we're ready to recap this, and that's what we're going to do in a second. We're going to move over to the work area to do that. And that may be very necessary because I'm going to show you something. Yeah, this video is nothing but up and down. So have a look. Everything's plugged in correctly. We'll turn it on, and you'll see in a second the fan will start spinning there. Now the other light comes on and it starts spinning. I've actually got the CPU in here at the moment with a passive cooler. This switches on and then nothing. Yeah, we don't have any video anymore. Now I have to assume the graphics card hasn't died. It may have, but to make sure with that, off camera, I tested this. This is told to me is working. I got no video with this either. So it's possible the board is broken, and you know, it being the generation of technology that it is, I wouldn't be able to fix it easily because it has literally microscopic resistors on there and things like that, caps. So it's not really from a generation of hardware that I would be able to easily repair. So let's turn it off. Yeah, the CPU is hardly doing anything there. So what I need to do now is break it down. We're going to move it over there and we're going to get these caps in. And once we're finished with that, we're going to bring it back and test it again. And fingers crossed, these will get it back on its feet. So I brought the board over to the working area and I was going to show you the process of changing the caps in pretty much real time. But I realized it really wasn't worth showing because it just takes too much time, you know, desoldering the caps and then cleaning it and blah, blah, blah. There are plenty more videos out there where that process is shown. What I will show you though is what I discovered when I actually measured the capacitance of the caps that I removed, you know, comparing that to the brand new caps that have arrived. So let's have a quick look at that before we carry on. Okay, so this one. It'll take a while to charge up. 1.41. So it's not in the same units as this, but I'm reading that as 1,300. So it's less than half of the rating that it should be. So that's pretty bad. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. Again, one of the two, which didn't look too bad. A little bit of bulging on it. 1.47, very similar. And now for the one that looked the worst. Does it live up to its reputation or is it actually not that bad? Interesting. Completely different. Okay, let's compare that to a brand new cap. Let's give that a go. Okay, let's try this one. .4. So basically slightly higher capacitance than it's rated for. And let's go back to this one again. Yeah. So interestingly, capacitors can actually not only decrease in capacitance as they become problematic, but they can also increase in capacitance. So you can see here it's 3.6. It started off as being 3.7 and it's dropping. This is definitely out of range, higher than it should be, and it shows that there was a problem with it. And those other ones were 1.4. So like I said, less than half of the power that they should have been really. So these caps were definitely on their way out. So I found that pretty interesting. So the two caps, which would have been, I believe, filtering the power to the CPU, they had both lost over half their capacitance. So that was really interesting because they didn't actually look as bad as the one which was in the middle of the logic board. And then the one which was in the middle of the logic board had actually increased in capacitance. And this is a thing that can happen with caps. I'm not sure how harmful that would have been to the operation of the machine, but it does show that the cap is obviously on its way out. So it made a lot of sense actually that we just replace those caps. And obviously in the future, I may have to keep an eye on the caps on the rest of the board. But to be fair, they're all looking really good at this point in time. So I think we're good. So let's get back onto the table and see if what we've done has made an impact on this machine. Here we are, we're back on the table and I've got the machine back in its case. And you may be wondering why I've done that. I mean, obviously it would be easier if it was still out on the table, even if it is on top of an ice cream tub. But there was an issue. So that's a little bit complicated. So I'm going to explain it by, let's test the machine. Let's see if we've actually got anything improved after replacing the caps. So I'm just going to turn it on here. If you keep an eye on the monitor, let's see what happens. You can see I've got the new graphics card plugged in, the Zotac Ti. There we go, we've got graphics again. And this is actually the hard disk booting up. So I'm going to leave it boot up and I'm going to press F1 to let it carry on. And I'm going to be a little bit quiet for a second because what I want you to hear is the speed of the fan here, the system fan. This is plugged in. It's got a heat sensor on the CPU, so it's going to react to the temperature of the CPU. So let's just see what happens as it boots up. Right now, it's actually pretty quiet. I can start to hear the fan. It's getting louder. Still booting up. It's getting louder and louder. It's actually rocking the microphone there. It's starting to produce so much air that the microphone actually can't handle it anymore. And let's stop it. Let's turn it off. There we go. So obviously this copper heatsink that we have here, it's a tiddly little thing. That combined with this airflow isn't going to do the job. So why is it back in the case? Well, when it was out on the desk, on the ice cream tub and all that, I had the cooler on, which we'd managed to get working using the DuPont connectors, and I would turn it on and I would get nothing. So then I took out the memory and I got a memory error, which showed that the CPU was working because, you know, it has to check the BIOS and all that sort of stuff. So the CPU was functional. But when I put the memory back in, it booted up. And that's when I found out that this graphics card was working okay. I put in the other graphics card, the GTX 8800, nothing. I actually think that card is working. I just think it's a problem with the booting process. So I took that card back out, put this back in, nothing again, which is why, like I said, I think it's the booting process. So I took out the RAM stick, put it back in, booted again. So there's this really weird thing going on where if you don't touch the configuration of the machine, it won't boot up. But if you make a change to the configuration, it does. So I thought maybe there's something to do with this cable here and some kind of information coming from the machine and going to the power supply here, and basically that then powering the machine. So as an experiment, I put it back in its case and it worked fine. Every single time now when you turn it on here with the built-in power supply, it turns on just in the way that you've just seen it. So the upshot of all of this is that now we should really try and get it working with the actual cooler that we have here. This is the one which is missing the heatsink. I've actually put this bracket back in, the bracket that's a little bit off camera, sorry, but that bracket is now back in position. It's screwed into the logic board, and that's one of the reasons why, again, I had to put it into the case. And if I try and actually put this on, it does go on just about, and there we are, we can close it up. So sometimes I actually thought that I would actually take this out, have to take out the graphics card, which would be a bit of a pain when testing, but it does look like it can actually go in like this. So that's good news. So what we need to do next is have a quick look at these and what the options are, and then come back and actually put one of these on and see if it cools the CPU correctly. Okay, so obviously this is the cooling system that came with the machine. Not going to work, no heatsink. So I went on eBay and, as I said earlier, I did a bit of searching and I found that these are a commodity on eBay. And I ordered this guy, obviously substantially heavier with an aluminium heatsink. And I believe that this is the cooler. And if I put the plastic shroud side by side, you can see that they are identical, basically. So yeah, I think my intuition, which is that this is a sort of commodity product that was used in a number of different Dell machines, different models, was true. This is the aluminium block that would go in this machine. I don't know why they've cut it like that, but obviously that's where the die of the processor is meant to go. Which way around would it be? So it would be like this. Obviously you would have some thermal paste on the CPU, and it just basically hinges onto it like that, sort of hinges downwards. So we could go with this, but I was in conversation with some people on Reddit, and not something I've used a great deal until recently, oddly, unlike most people, but I've started to get into it, and it's just quite a cool place to engage with the audience of this channel. Also get some information because, you know, there are very, very knowledgeable people out there, and I thought, well, let's have a look if there's an XP group, and there is. And the guys there were actually very helpful. I asked them basically, what do you think I should do in terms of putting a CPU in this machine? And I got a lot of information about that, so that's interesting. But one of them actually said, did you know that there is a version of this cooler which has a copper heat pipe? And of course I didn't know that, but the guy was kind enough to actually give me the model number, which is gold, because, you know, if you search for that on eBay, you may never find it. And I did a search, and lo and behold, I came up with this behemoth. Copper, obviously much better heat spreading capabilities, copper pipes coming out, going all the way to the top of the plastic shroud. Now it makes sense what these holes are for. It's for the actual ends of these pipes to poke out. And what's really nice about it as well is that it basically fills the entire space. So the air is going to come in through the back here. This is where the big fan is. And it's going to blow into here and go through all of these fins and give a lot more cooling. I am thinking about overclocking this machine. Obviously, we're not going to have a look at that yet. We need to get it working on a basic level. So let's put this cooler in and boot it up and see how much the fan ramps up when this is in place. Okay, so we've got the copper heatsink here, the heat pipe. I'm going to try and do what I did earlier, which is just to get it over these little plastic posts here. There we are. And I should be able to just lower this down now onto the CPU. Okay, that's sitting on the CPU. I'm giving it a wriggle around so that the thermal paste spreads out a bit. And I think all we need to do now is just put the microphone back in so we can hear the same audio as last time. There we are, it's on. Can't quite put it in the same spot because obviously that's where the cooler is. So let's turn it on. Obviously can't see the fan anymore, unfortunately, so I can't really tell that it's on, but I'm assuming that it's on. And all I'm going to do is let it boot up like we did just now. We just want to see how much more the fan is silent. Fingers crossed it'll be very quiet. That'll show that this cooler is doing the job. We need it like that because we can't install Windows XP if the CPU is going to get so hot that it destroys itself. So let's just wait for it to boot up. It's working hard right now. The CPU's actively loading data. So far, nothing. Great. I think we're good. It's not surprising. It's the best cooler you can get for this. But I've not tested it before, honestly, so I just wanted to make sure that it was working great before we try and install Windows XP. So this is obviously the original XP installed by the owner of this original machine. We are not going to use this. I have this Kingston SSD here. It's a 480 gigabyte drive. I have a USB key ready to go. I've not tried installing Windows XP, and I'm not really going to do that on camera because it can be quite a long installation process, as you know. So we're going to just do that. Yeah, let's try installing Windows XP. So the first thing that I had to do was adjust the BIOS so that it disabled all of the drives that could boot, apart from the USB drive, which is what I was going to use to try and install from, the Kingston hard drive that I had plugged in via SATA. I tried booting and I found that didn't work, so then I realized I had to change the order. So then I changed the order so that USB was first and the hard drive second, and then the installer actually started to boot. So I tried to install Windows XP Pro 32-bit from an ISO, which I found had been created in 2020. It claimed that it was Service Pack 3 and had all the latest features. This was then written to a 1 gigabyte USB stick using a piece of software called Win Setup from USB. I'll put a link to it in the description of this video so you can use it if it's useful to you. And I found this worked pretty well after a bit of fiddling around, and it then produced a bootable USB drive for me, which used the Grub Loader system. So with this Grub Loader, it has an option to search for the required AHCI drivers for the starter drive. And you need these drivers because without them, the installation can't actually mount the hard drive. It can't recognize it. So that's obviously a pretty critical feature. So I set this off, and it took quite a while actually to install the driver. But when it was finished, it went back to the XP menu, and I then went ahead with the installation. But I found there was an issue. The installer would blue screen every single time, saying that it could not find the drivers, which was weird because I just installed the drivers. So I tried this several more times with the same result. It always crashed. So I read online that this Dell uses a RAID driver, and that by default, when there's only one hard drive plugged in, it defaults back to using the AHCI driver. That's an automatic thing. And it actually recommends in the BIOS that you don't switch it off basically RAID mode, because it will automatically fall back onto AHCI. So I tried to find these drivers online in a separate install, and I did actually find one from Intel. But when I unpacked it, it was full of cab files, and I don't know how to unpack those. And I just decided that this was getting a little bit too gnarly. I would somehow have to extract the drivers from there and then write those to the USB drive. And obviously I wouldn't know exactly where that would be. So I decided at this point to try and change tack. So I did a search on archive.org, and I found an official Dell XP Pro 32-bit installer ISO from 2006. So this would have been the exact disk basically that was probably used to install the operating system in the first place. So I burnt that onto a CD, and then I connected up the CD-ROM drive on the E520, and I gave installing it from there a go. So this time I had more success. The installer found the correct drivers, and the installation of XP actually then went ahead. And after about 10 minutes, the install had completed, and I took out the CD, and then I tried to reboot, and nothing. It just wouldn't reboot. It wouldn't find any drives, nothing whatsoever. It would just sit there. I scratched my head at this point, and I thought to myself, this is really weird. Why won't it boot? So now I thought to myself, well, on the logic board, there is actually 4 USB connectors. There's a blue one, an orange one, The blue one was used for the boot hard drive that the machine came with, the orange one for the CD-ROM, and then the other two are basically secondary SATA ports. So I thought, well, maybe it only boots from the blue port. So I thought that was worth a try. So I unplugged the Kingston drive and plugged it into the main port. And then I did a complete installation again. And when I rebooted the machine, it booted. Happy times. I'm just flabbergasted. It took about 2 hours to do that. I think maybe even more. It's now 9 o'clock at night. And I started doing that, yeah, probably be about 6:30, something like that. So it's taken absolutely hours to get that to install, which is why I didn't want to do it in real time. But anyway, we got there in the end. We got the graphics card working. It doesn't have the correct drivers yet. It doesn't have the NVIDIA specific ones. So yeah, great. We now have a base camp that I can now explore different CPUs, possibly upgrading the memory as well. Also overclocking too. Wow, well, that was a bit of an adventure, wasn't it? I must admit, when I found it on the pavement, it was about, I think it was about a year ago. I think actually it was last summer. When my wife actually, alerted me to the machine, as I said in the previous video, I wasn't that particularly interested in it because it was a relatively what appeared to me to be a new machine. But it's actually the design of the machine, when the case is on, when the side is on, it's actually very modern looking, I think, still. And because of that, I kind of underestimated its retro credentials. But it's actually proven to be quite a nice, interesting retro journey. We've looked inside and we found that the caps were bulging in the middle of the board, and we measured the capacitance on those and we found that, what was it? Two of them were below half capacitance and the other one was going up, but then dropping. So it's all over the place, really. So it's interesting that a machine from 2005, 2006, I'm not sure exactly when this was bought. I think the machine came out in 2004, 2005, but then it probably had a bit of a life because the Core 2 Duo range of processors was pretty stable, strong run from Intel. They're having big problems at the moment, but you've got to give them credit that back in the middle of the 2000s, they were producing some really great CPUs with the Core 2 Duo range and then later the quad core range. So it's an interesting machine and it's on the verge of what I would call retro. I've had people on Reddit and Vogons say, well, actually, no, it was only on Reddit that said it isn't retro. I said to one guy, well, if it isn't retro, what is it? Because it's definitely a vintage PC. It's 20 years old. What's the difference between vintage and retro? I would call it a vintage machine because it's old, but it's not necessarily retro looking. But it is, by today's standards, it is a retro machine. It's only got 2 cores. We're going to probably change that later. But yeah, I think it's a retro machine and I definitely think it belongs on this channel. So along the way, we got this cooler, really interesting design, bit of sort of Art Deco vibe going on there. But now we're not using that because we have the copper heatsink in place, the best heatsink, which I would assume came along later in the life of this machine. Maybe as the heat requirements went up, Intel designed more powerful coolers. Although, to be fair, these holes are present in all of them. So maybe not. Maybe it was always the plan from the beginning and it was just a case of if you were willing to pay more money for a certain model of machine, then you would have got a better cooler. Maybe these heat pipe ones were used in the higher end Dell machines of this era. The graphics card, as we saw, had a problem. The GTX 8800, we can't use that because it just won't fit beyond here. Even this graphics card, I had to take off the back plate to get it to fit in the machine. And the reason for that is that, I don't know if you can see that, but basically it's a double width bracket. And this slot here, which is where this card is plugged into, is actually the last slot on the logic board. And there isn't actually a slot here for this to go. So it did kind of squeak in behind the back of the case. And I tried removing the tab here, which this would slot into somewhere on the board, but there isn't a slot. And I did the same thing here. I actually cut off this here so it would actually fit into the case, but it still wouldn't fit. So I'm not sure if I'm going to attempt to Dremel this. It would be a lot of work, to cut that in half. The other alternative is that I could possibly 3D print this either myself, or I could ask a friend, Lee, maybe if he'd be so kind to print out a new bracket. I could send this to him and ask him to do a new bracket. possibly in some kind of carbon fiber filament. That would be quite interesting. So it comes out being quite strong. But I would like to get a back bracket on because it does give it some strength. So right now, this is off by necessity, but I would like to get that back onto the machine. We've got all these CPUs here. Again, that was a little bit of an odyssey, a journey in, down memory lane and sort of finding out about all these different processors. Because don't forget, unless you're working in IT, back in the 2000s when I bought my own PC, I would have been, iterating through all these different processors. I would have probably picked one processor and I would have been stuck with that probably for another 5-6 years, to be honest. I did find out, I think it was, where is it? Yeah, this one, the E520 3.2 gigahertz. I actually thought this was a very fast processor. And it is. I mean, it is by the clock speed, but it turns out it's not actually a Core 2 Duo. It's basically the Pentium technology that came out just before they moved over to the Core 2 Duo range. And because of that, it isn't actually as efficient as the Core 2 Duo. So if I were to compete it with the Core 2 Duo, it probably has a smaller cache as well. That's one of the issues with it. I do have this quad-core CPU, and this one is 2.66 gigahertz. So obviously 4 cores, but a slower clock speed, so that might not be the best CPU for this machine. Then I have this one, which is another Core 2 Duo, 2.95 gigahertz. Probably not going to be using that in the end because it kind of falls between two stools. And what I have here, and this was on the advice of somebody from Reddit, I have a 3.3 gigahertz Core 2 Duo, and as far as I understand, that is the fastest dual core chip that was ever produced in this range. So I think it's going to be a toss-up between using this super fast Core 2 Duo or this quad core CPU. I will try and overclock the machine, and I'm going to do it by a trick, I think, where you cover up one of the pads on the CPU, which allows you to basically run a faster front-side bus, I think it is. And then I may be able to get this to run at a faster speed. So if I could get this to run at, let's say, near 3.3 gigahertz, then this would be the better option, I think, because this would give you quad core, which would be useful in some circumstances. And if I can't do that, then we've got, as it were, Old Faithful, a bona fide 3.3 gigahertz CPU. And if we can overclock, I should also try this out as well and maybe see how fast we can push this. I understand that you can sometimes get these up to 4 gigahertz, but at the end of the day, I think I'd rather have a machine that's pretty fast but relatively quiet, so I don't really want to absolutely thrash this. But we're going to do that in the next chapter. My job between now and then is to install all of the drivers on here. There's chipset drivers, I think there's hard disk drivers, drivers for the CD-ROM, the graphics card obviously will be a very important one. I've got to find out which nVidia driver I should be installing. So I've got quite a lot of work to do before then. So yeah, I'll crack on with that, and I'll catch you in the next video where we're going to try and overclock this. And hopefully then we will get to play Temple of Elemental Evil. Don't forget that that is the reason why we are doing this series, is to get ourselves a Dell gaming machine to play that game. And of course, other games from that era. I'm probably going to go back and dive into that era and see what other games there were, because I know it was a really great time in gaming. There were some fantastic games out in that period. So anyway, that's it for this video, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Please make sure you hit the like button if you have. Also make sure you subscribe, hit the bell so you are notified about the next video when it comes out. And I've also heard that YouTube is introducing a new feature to promote videos called hyping. Not quite sure how that's meant to work, but if you know how to hype a video and you enjoyed this video, please give it a hype. Stand on a soapbox and get your megaphone out and shout about it, and help us to get this video to the top of the leaderboard charts in this topic, as it were. Anyway, from now until the next video, I hope you have a good day, and until then, take care and goodbye.